Hello, and welcome back to Ebon Whisper. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy chilling tales that speak in the Ebon Whisper, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1, the first time I saw the medical bill, I laughed. There was nothing funny about it. I did not laugh because the amount was small or because I thought the hospital had made a mistake. I laughed because my mind could not find any other way to react. The number was so large that it did not feel real. I sat alone in a plastic chair beside my daughter's hospital bed, holding several pages of charges that seemed to go on forever. Room fees, tests, scans, medication, specialist visits, equipment, surgical preparation. Words I barely understood followed by prices that made my chest feel tight. I was a widower. My credit had already been destroyed after my wife died. I was behind on rent, still making payments on a car that broke down every few weeks, and working long shifts at an auto plant outside Detroit. My daughter, Keisha, was 8 years old. She was lying in a bed at Children's Hospital with a machine helping her breathe. Small wires were attached to her chest. A tube ran beneath her nose. Her skin looked pale under the cold hospital lights, and every few seconds a monitor beside her made a soft electronic sound. I watched the green lines moving across the screen as if my attention alone could keep her alive. Keisha had been born with a problem in one of the valves in her heart. For years, doctors had monitored it and told us there was no immediate danger. She could go to school. She could play carefully. She could live a normal life as long as we attended her appointments. Then, one afternoon, she collapsed during gym class. By the time I reached the hospital, 3 doctors were waiting for me. The surgeon explained that the valve had become worse. Keisha needed an operation as soon as possible. He said it was fixable. He used the word routine twice. He said many children recovered well from the procedure. He explained survival rates and treatment plans in a calm voice. I tried to listen, but all I could hear was my daughter crying as nurses placed another needle in her arm. The surgeon may have called the operation routine. Billing did not. The insurance company called the charges out of network complications. The hospital called them patient responsibility. I called them impossible. The total was more money than I could earn in years. Even if I worked 2 shifts every day at the plant, even if I stopped sleeping and lived on vending machine food, I could never pay it all. I would be old before the debt was gone. Maybe I would be dead first. The woman from billing sat across from me with a tablet in her hands. She spoke in a gentle voice, the kind people use when they have terrible news but do not want to feel responsible for it. She talked about payment plans. She mentioned charity applications. She explained that financial assistance could take time and might not cover everything. Time was the one thing Keisha did not have. I nodded as if I understood. When the woman left, I looked at my daughter. Keisha was sleeping. One of her hands rested outside the blanket. I reached over and wrapped my fingers around it. Her hand was so small. I remembered all the things I had told her when she was younger. I would do anything for you. I would give my right arm for you. I would trade places with you if I could. Parents say those things because they believe love is poetry. It is not. Love is math. It is a bill placed in front of you. It is a balance due. It is a number beside the life of the person you love most. 3 nights later, I found the market. I will not explain exactly how I found it. I searched long enough to know I was entering places no normal person should visit. I used private browsers, strange links, and forums that disappeared whenever I refreshed the page. At first, I was searching for financial help. Then I started looking for private lenders. After that, I searched for ways to sell blood, plasma, or bone marrow. The normal websites did not offer enough. Eventually, I found darker pages. People were selling things no legal hospital would allow. One man claimed he was selling a kidney somewhere in Europe. A woman advertised her eggs. Someone in Toledo offered a cornea and said the price was negotiable. Most of the posts looked fake. Poor grammar, stolen photographs, promises of easy money. Some were clearly scams. Others looked too real. Those were worse. They included blood types, health records, medical scans, and photographs of scars. People discussed how much certain organs were worth, which countries had fewer restrictions, and how long recovery might take. They talked about human bodies like cars being stripped for parts. I should have closed the page. Instead, I kept searching. Then I found a buyer in Detroit. The listing was short. Seeking healthy adult liver segment. Type O preferred. High compensation. Discreet extraction. Half up front. Half after successful transfer. I read it again, then a third time. A liver can grow back. I knew that from somewhere. Maybe I had seen it in a documentary. Maybe a doctor had said it on television. Maybe I wanted it to be true so badly that my brain invented the memory. The liver was not like a heart. It was not like selling both lungs. I could lose part of it and survive. That was what I told myself. The amount offered was enough to cover Keisha's surgery, her stay in the hospital, her medication, and several months of rent. For the first time since seeing the bill, I felt hope. It was not clean hope. It felt like opening a door in a burning building and discovering darkness on the other side. Still, it was a door. I messaged the buyer. They replied almost immediately. They asked for my blood type, age, height, weight, medical history, and whether I had ever used drugs. They asked for recent photographs of my face, body, and eyes. They wanted proof of identity. I sent everything. Each time I pressed send, part of me screamed that I was making a terrible mistake. I ignored it. Less than 10 minutes later, another message arrived. Accepted, half payment released. Confirm wallet. I stared at the screen. I had expected more questions. I had expected an interview or a medical examination. Instead, the money appeared in my Bitcoin wallet the next morning. I spent hours trying to understand how to convert it without attracting attention. Eventually, I transferred enough to cover the hospital deposit. The billing office called me that afternoon. The woman's voice had changed. She sounded warmer, relieved, respectful. People treat you differently when you can pay. Keisha's operation was scheduled. The buyer sent me the meeting location shortly afterward, an alley near Michigan Avenue, not far from the old train station. Midnight, no clinic address, no doctor's name, no instructions about recovery, only the location and time. I almost changed my mind 6 times. I wrote a message saying I could not do it, then deleted it. I walked around the hospital until my legs hurt. I called my brother and nearly told him everything. But when he answered, I asked how work was instead. At 11:30, I stood beside Keisha's bed. She was asleep. The light from the heart monitor made her cheeks look green. I bent down and kissed her forehead. "Daddy's fixing it," I whispered. I do not know whether I was speaking to her or trying to convince myself. Outside, the June air was thick and dirty. Detroit is never truly empty at night. Even when the sidewalks are clear, the city seems to watch you through dark windows, broken glass, and idling cars. Sirens moved somewhere in the distance. A train horn sounded far away. I parked 2 blocks from the meeting place because I did not want anyone seeing my license plate. I wore a dark sweatshirt with the hood pulled over my head. My hands shook inside my pockets as I walked. The alley smelled like wet cardboard, old cooking grease, urine, and something sweet that had begun to rot. I reached the location a few minutes before midnight. There was no van, no private ambulance, no doctor wearing a mask, no cooler filled with ice. For a moment, I thought I had been robbed. The money had already been sent. But perhaps the plan had been to lure me there and take it back somehow. Then I saw someone standing beneath a metal fire escape. At first, I thought it was a homeless man wrapped in black rubbish bags. The shape was too tall, but it stood bent forward, one shoulder lower than the other. I called out softly, "Hello?" The figure moved. It stepped into the weak light behind a restaurant. That was when I saw its skin. It did not have one skin. It had many. Pieces of flesh had been joined together across its body. A dark section of a man's shoulder covered one side. The other shoulder was pale and narrow, stitched at the neck with thick black thread. Parts of arms, stomachs, backs, thighs, and faces stretched over a shape that was much too tall to be human. Some pieces were fresh. They looked pink, wet, and alive. Others had turned gray-green and hung loosely from the body. Its chest moved in different sections, as if several hearts were beating inside it at separate speeds. Tubes ran beneath the skin. They twisted and pulsed like worms trapped under plastic. One arm was long and muscular. The other was thin, with several different hands attached around the wrist. One of those hands looked like it belonged to a woman. Another was swollen, dark, and rotting at the fingertips. Its head turned toward me. It had 3 eyes. None of them matched. One was blue. One was almost black. The third was small and cloudy, hanging slightly lower than the others. Its mouth was made from several lips joined together unevenly. I tried to run. The creature crossed the entire alley in one jump. I barely saw it move. One moment it was beneath the fire escape. The next, it was against me. Its mouth opened. Needle-like teeth pushed through the stitched lips. The bite landed in my neck. It was not a tearing bite. It was careful, precise. The teeth entered my skin like medical needles. Something cold spread from my neck down my spine. My legs stopped working. My knees gave out, but I never hit the ground. The creature caught me. Its hands were gentle. That was the worst part. It lowered me slowly, supporting my head as though it cared about my comfort. I could see, I could hear, I could feel pressure, but I could not move. My body had become an object. I tried to scream, but my mouth only fell open. No sound came out. The creature laid me flat on the asphalt. Then it opened me. It carried no medical bag. It had no tools. It grew them. Thin blades pushed from the seams in its wrists. They slid out through the stitched flesh with a wet sound. A clear tube uncoiled from beneath its ribs. Fluid moved inside it, glowing faintly in the darkness. Then something came from its mouth. It was wet, red, and muscular. It was not exactly a tongue. It was not exactly a hand. Small fingers opened at the end of it. They pressed against my stomach. The movement was careful and certain, like a surgeon testing where to make the first cut. I wanted to tell it to stop. I wanted to say I had changed my mind. I wanted to beg for help. My face did nothing. The creature began to work. One blade cut beneath my ribs. I felt the pressure. Then the warmth. I felt the skin separate. There should have been pain. There should have been so much pain that my mind broke beneath it. Instead, the creature had trapped me inside my body without letting me feel enough to pass out. It opened me layer by layer. The clear tube entered my neck. Cold liquid flowed through it. My heartbeat slowed, but did not stop. The creature reached inside me. I felt pulling, deep movement. A pressure so wrong that my mind could not understand it. It felt as though someone were rearranging my organs like furniture inside a room. Warm blood spread across my stomach, but it did not pour onto the ground. The creature used pieces of itself to hold the wound open. Small tubes drank the blood and pushed it back into me. It was keeping me alive. It wanted me awake. One of its eyes began to twitch. The cloudy one slipped farther from its socket. Then it fell. It struck the creature's cheek and burst, releasing a yellow fluid. The creature ignored it. One of its hands reached up, removed the empty tissue, and pressed a folded piece of skin over the hole. Then it continued. Minutes passed. Or hours. I could not tell. The alley became the entire world. The creature leaned over me, its mismatched chest rising and falling. Different mouths hidden across its body opened and closed. Some whispered. Others breathed. One made a crying sound like a small child. Then I understood something that made the paralysis feel like mercy. The pieces were not dead. Not completely. Some part of the people they had come from still remained. A mouth near the creature's ribs opened. Please, it whispered. The voice was a woman's. Another piece of flesh twitched. A man's eye opened in the creature's shoulder and looked directly at me. It blinked once. Then a hand pressed over it. The creature finally removed part of my liver. I saw it hold the dark red section beneath the weak alley light. It turned it carefully, inspecting it from every side. One of its mouths smiled. The organ disappeared into a split in the creature's chest. The opening closed around it. Its entire body shuddered. The skin across its stomach tightened. Several old patches changed color, becoming slightly healthier. It had not come to collect the organ for someone else. It was the buyer. It had paid for a piece of me because it needed new parts. The creature returned its attention to my wound. It removed the tools from inside me and sealed the cut with a strip of material that looked like human skin. The strip moved by itself. It crawled across my stomach, pressing the wound closed. Tiny threads grew from its edges and entered my flesh. Within seconds, the bleeding slowed. The creature leaned close. Its breath smelled like coins, hospital disinfectant, and spoiled meat. The remaining eyes studied my face. I thought it might take more. Instead, it reached into my pocket and removed my phone. It pressed my thumb against the screen to unlock it. Then it called emergency services. When the operator answered, the creature spoke. It used my voice, not a rough copy, not an imitation. My exact voice. Help, it said. I need an ambulance. There's a man bleeding out. Alley near Michigan and 14th. Hurry, the operator began asking questions. The creature dropped the phone beside my head. Then it stood. It looked heavier than before. The side of its body where it had placed my liver bulged and moved beneath the patchwork flesh. It dragged itself toward the darkness. One of the smaller hands brushed my forehead before it left, almost like a goodbye. I lay alone in the alley, listening to the emergency operator call for me through the phone. I wanted to answer. I could not. The cold feeling in my spine slowly began to weaken. My fingers twitched. Pain arrived all at once. The world turned white. I woke in the hospital 2 days later. A nurse was standing over me. For several seconds, I believed I was beside Keisha's bed again. Then I tried to move and felt a terrible pulling beneath my ribs. A drainage tube ran from my side. Bandages covered my stomach and neck. The nurse told me I was lucky. A passerby had found me in the alley. I had suffered severe internal trauma, but somehow the bleeding had been minimal. Doctors had removed damaged tissue and repaired the wound. One of them said the cut was unlike anything he had ever seen. The edges were too clean. The closure material attached to my skin did not match any medical product they recognized. They had removed most of it for testing. According to the nurse, one piece had continued moving after being placed in a specimen container. It had died when they exposed it to strong light. Police officers waited outside my room. They wanted to know why I had been in the alley. They asked whether someone had attacked me. They asked if I had agreed to an illegal medical procedure. I said I remembered nothing. It was easier than telling the truth. They would have thought the drugs or blood loss had confused me. Maybe they would have arrested me. Maybe they would have delayed Keisha's operation. I could not risk that. Her surgery was scheduled for Monday. That night, I lay in my hospital bed with the drainage tube pulling at my side. Keisha had been moved into the same room temporarily because she became upset when she learned I had been injured. She was asleep in a bed beside mine. The monitors made soft sounds around us. Police officers remained in the hallway. My phone rested on the tray beside me. It buzzed. I looked at it. A notification from my digital wallet appeared on the screen. The rest of the payment had been deposited. Below it was a new message from the buyer. Excellent match. Contact us again if you are interested in doing further business. I should have thrown the phone across the room. I should have deleted everything. I should have told the police about the market, the buyer, and the creature in the alley. Instead, I looked at Keisha. She was still pale, still weak, but the surgery was paid for. She was going to have a chance. That piece of my body had become medicine, hospital care, rent, and time. I opened a browser with my left hand. I searched for how much of a liver a person could lose and still survive. Then I searched for other organs. You can live with one kidney. You can live without part of a lung. You can live without an eye. You can sell bone marrow more than once. The searches continued until morning. Keisha's operation went well. The surgeon said everything had gone as expected. He used the word routine again. This time I nearly cried when he said it. She recovered slowly. Within 2 weeks, she was walking through the hospital halls with a nurse. A month later, she was home. My own recovery was more difficult. The cut beneath my ribs healed, but it never looked normal. The scar remained dark and slightly raised. Sometimes it moved. I would wake at night and feel something pulling beneath my skin. When I placed my hand over the scar, I could feel a pulse that did not match my heartbeat. Doctors said it was probably damaged nerves. I let them believe that. The hospital bills kept coming. There were new charges for Keisha's follow-up care. Medication, therapy, tests, my rent increased. The plant reduced overtime. The money from the liver began to disappear. I kept thinking about the buyer's final message. Further business. For weeks, I resisted. Then, Keisha's prescription was rejected by insurance. The pharmacy wanted several $100s. I stood at the counter while she waited beside me, holding my hand. The woman behind the register looked sorry. That same evening, I opened the hidden market again. The buyer's account was still active. I sent one message. What else do you need? The reply arrived immediately. The words appeared so quickly that I knew it had been waiting. Healthy, left kidney. Higher compensation. Same procedure. Recovery assistance included. I stared at the amount. It was enough to clear most of our debt. Enough to replace my failing car. Enough to build savings for Keisha. I told myself I would do it only once more. The meeting location was different. Another alley. Another midnight. This time I did not shake as much. That frightened me. The creature was waiting when I arrived. It looked healthier than before. A fresh section of skin covered part of its stomach. My skin. The color matched mine exactly. I saw one of my moles near its ribs. The creature tilted its head in recognition. One of its mouths smiled. It spoke in my voice. Daddy's fixing it. I nearly ran. Then I remembered the pharmacy bill. I stayed. The second procedure was easier. The creature used the same bite, the same cold paralysis. It opened me with the same care. This time, I knew what was coming. That made it worse. I watched it remove my kidney. I watched it place the organ inside itself. As it worked, I noticed something new. My eye was growing from its shoulder, not one of my actual eyes. A copy. It opened and looked at me. For a second, I saw through it. I saw myself lying on the ground from the creature's point of view. Then the connection disappeared. When I woke in the hospital, the money was already in my account. I told the police I had been robbed. They did not believe me, but they could not prove anything. Months passed. I stopped pretending I would never contact the buyer again. Every financial problem became a calculation. A hospital bill equaled bone marrow. A broken transmission equaled part of a lung. School clothes equaled an eye. My body stopped feeling like me. It became a list of items, a collection of possible payments. The creature always left enough for me to survive. That was part of the agreement. It needed donors alive. Living bodies could produce more. After the third procedure, I began hearing voices from my scars. Not clearly. Only whispers. Sometimes they sounded like people begging. Sometimes they spoke in languages I did not understand. Other times I heard my own voice, coming from somewhere far away. Keisha noticed I was changing. I became thinner. My skin turned gray. I wore long sleeves and avoided mirrors. When she asked why I had so many scars, I told her they were from the attack. She was old enough to know I was lying. One night, she stood in my bedroom doorway. "You don't have to keep fixing everything," she said. I could not answer. She had no idea what those words meant. The creature contacted me before I could contact it again. "We have a special request," the message said. The amount offered was larger than anything before. I read the requested item. Healthy, juvenile heart tissue. Close blood relation preferred. I stopped breathing. Another message appeared. "Your daughter is an excellent match." I deleted the account. I destroyed the phone. I packed our things and took Keisha out of Detroit. We moved to another state. For a while, I believed we had escaped. Then, A package arrived at our new address. Inside was a small patch of skin. My skin. It moved in the box like a living thing. Beneath it was a note. We already invested in your family. The buyer had found us. I now understand the truth. The money was never payment. It was a claim. Each deposit bought another piece of me. Every time I returned, I gave the creature more than flesh. I gave it access. I gave it my blood, my voice, my memories, and my family. Last night, I woke to the sound of Keisha speaking in the kitchen. She was supposed to be asleep. I walked into the hallway. The lights were off. A tall figure stood beside the back door. It wore many skins. One shoulder was mine. One eye was mine. When it smiled, it used my mouth. Keisha stood in front of it. Frozen, the creature reached toward her with gentle hands. I attacked it. I do not remember deciding to move. I grabbed a kitchen knife and drove it into the creature's chest. Several mouths screamed. One of them was mine. The creature struck me once and sent me across the room. Then it looked down at Keisha. It could have taken her. Instead, it turned toward me. The eye in its shoulder opened. Through it, I saw myself bleeding on the floor. The creature stepped closer. It spoke in my voice. Further business, it said. Then it left. Keisha is asleep beside me now. We are in a motel, moving again. I do not know where we can go. I have no money left. My body is failing. The scars are opening. Something beneath my ribs moves whenever I think about the creature. I believe it left part of itself inside me during the first procedure. Maybe that is how it finds us. Maybe that is how it knows what I see. I started writing this as a warning. I wanted to tell people never to search for the market, never to believe the listings, never to turn their body into a payment plan. But I keep looking at Keisha. I keep thinking about what the creature wants. Healthy, juvenile heart tissue. Close blood relation preferred. There may still be one way to protect her. A heart is worth more than everything else. A heart cannot grow back. A person cannot live without one. But perhaps that is the final price. I used to tell Keisha I would give my life for her. Parents say things like that because they believe love is poetry. Now I know better. Love is math. Love is a balance due. And somewhere out there, the buyer is still waiting for the last payment. Story 2. The air at Camp Silver Lake was thick with the smell of damp pine trees, wet soil, and wood smoke. It had rained earlier that afternoon, and drops of water still fell from the branches whenever the wind passed through them. The entire camp seemed colder after sunset, even though it was the middle of July. Camp Silver Lake was not the kind of summer camp shown in advertisements. There were no bright new cabins, clean swimming pools, or cheerful buildings covered in fresh paint. Everything looked old. The wooden cabins had dark stains beneath their windows. The docks leaned toward the lake, and several paths had become so overgrown that the counselors warned us not to use them. The main recreation hall was probably the oldest building in the camp. It stood near the center of the grounds, between the mess hall and the path leading down to the lake. It was a long, drafty building with moth-eaten curtains, crooked windows, and a wooden floor that groaned beneath every footstep. There was an old stone fireplace at one end of the room, though the counselors rarely used it because smoke often filled the hall instead of going up the chimney. That night, nearly 20 of us were gathered inside. A storm was expected before morning, so the counselors had canceled the campfire by the lake. Instead, we sat in a loose circle, around two old camping lanterns while rain tapped softly against the windows. The lights in the building had gone out twice that week, and no one wanted to risk turning them on during another storm. Most of the younger campers were already asleep in their cabins. The group in the recreation hall was made up of teenagers between 13 and 16. We had been telling ghost stories for nearly an hour, though none of them were particularly frightening. Leo told a story about a hitchhiker who disappeared from the back seat of a car. Grace told one about a woman who heard scratching beneath her bed. Lenny told a ridiculous story involving a killer clown and a chainsaw, then became annoyed when everyone laughed at the wrong parts. After that, Madison began speaking. It wasn't always this quiet at Camp Silver Lake, she said. The group slowly settled down. Madison was a small girl who looked around 14. She wore a faded gray camp hoodie that seemed several sizes too large for her. The camp's old Silver Moon logo was barely visible on the front. Her dark hair looked as though it had not been brushed in days, and it hung in uneven waves around her pale face. I had noticed her on the first day of camp, but I could not remember seeing her during any daytime activities. She had not joined us for swimming, hiking, or canoeing. She never sat at our table during meals. Still, she seemed to appear every evening after the sun went down. No one questioned it. There were more than 100 campers at Silver Lake, so it was impossible to remember everyone. Madison spoke slowly, and her voice had a strange, empty rhythm. It sounded almost as though she had repeated the story so many times that she no longer needed to think about the words. 22 years ago, she continued, 3 campers went searching for something people called the shadow in the shed. Lenny made a quiet, laughing sound, but Madison ignored him. There used to be an old tool shed behind the mess hall. It's still there, but the counselors keep it locked now. People said a spirit had been trapped inside it. Some campers heard scratching behind the walls. Others said they saw a tall shadow moving beneath the door, even when the shed was empty. I glanced toward the windows. The mess hall stood on the other side of the recreation field. Behind it was a section of woods that the counselors had marked as off-limits. I had seen the tool shed once. It was a small, leaning building, nearly hidden by vines and trees. The door had been covered with wooden boards, and a thick chain was wrapped around the handles. During our first tour of the camp, the counselor told us the shed was unsafe because the roof could collapse. At the time, I had believed him. 3 campers decided they wanted to prove the rumors were fake, Madison said. Their names were Elias, Sam, and Madison. A few people glanced at her when she said the final name. She showed no reaction. They waited until everyone was asleep. Then they stole a lantern and went into the woods. Sam had taken a crowbar from the maintenance building. He used it to break the lock. The wind pushed against the recreation hall. One of the windows rattled in its frame. When they opened the shed, Madison said, it looked empty. There were rusty tools on the walls, broken chairs, bags of soil, and an old lawnmower. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. Elias laughed because he thought the whole story had been a joke. Madison's eyes moved around the circle, but then the door closed behind them. Grace pulled her knees closer to her chest. The lantern went out. Madison continued. In the darkness, they heard something breathing. It moved around them, but they couldn't see it. Sam tried to open the door, but it wouldn't move. What happened? One of the younger boys asked. Madison looked toward him. The shadow touched Elias first. Her voice became quieter. He screamed once. Then He went silent. When the lantern came back on, Elias was lying on the floor. He wasn't bleeding. Nothing on his body was broken. But he looked as if he had been dead for years. His skin had become dry and gray, and his eyes had sunk deep into his head. No one laughed now. Sam tried to run, Madison said. He smashed one of the windows and climbed through it. He made it halfway across the clearing before the shadow reached him. Her eyes shifted toward the black windows. It came out of the shed without opening the door. It moved across the ground like smoke. When it touched Sam, his body folded in on itself. By the time Madison reached him, there was almost nothing left except skin stretched over bone. The lantern flame flickered. The shadow did not simply kill them, Madison said. It pulled the life out of them. Everything they had ever felt, every memory, every hope, every fear. It took all of it and left empty bodies behind. I felt a chill move along my arms. But the third camper was different, Madison continued. Her grandmother had taught her things. What kind of things? Leo asked. Old things, Madison replied. Dark things. She leaned closer to the lantern. Her grandmother knew how to speak to the dead. She taught Madison how to recognize spirits, how to protect a house, and how to keep hungry things from following her home. She also taught her how to force the dead back into the earth when they refused to leave. Madison described how the girl had emptied a packet of salt onto the ground around herself. She drew a circle while the shadow moved between the trees. The wind had become stronger. Leaves and branches struck the outside walls of the recreation hall. Madison stood in the center of the salt circle, she said. The shadow could not cross it, but it waited just outside. It used the voices of Elias and Sam to call her name. Madison's fingers tightened around the sleeves of her hoodie. It begged her for help in their voices. Then it threatened her. It told her that if she left the circle, she would see her friends again. Did she believe it? I asked. For a moment. Madison looked directly at me. That was nearly enough. She continued the story. The girl had carried a small book filled with symbols and prayers written by her grandmother. She opened it and began reading aloud. The words were not Latin, English, or any language the children recognized. The sounds were sharp and unnatural. When the girl spoke them, the trees began leaking thick red sap from their trunks. The shadow screamed. Birds fell from the branches. The lake water pulled away from the shore as if frightened. Still, the girl continued. She called the spirit by the name it had possessed before it died. She commanded it to return to the place where it had first been buried. The ground opened beneath the shed, Madison said. Hands came out of the earth. Dozens of them. They grabbed the shadow and pulled it down. She raised one hand and slowly closed her fingers. The shadow fought. It promised to leave the camp forever if Madison released it. She knew it was lying. The room was completely silent except for the wind. She kept chanting until the earth swallowed it. Then she sealed the ground with salt, blood, and something taken from each of the dead boys. What did she take? Grace whispered. Madison's gaze lowered. A tooth. Several campers made disgusted sounds. When the sun rose, the counselors found the 3 children. Elias and Sam were dead. Madison was alive, but something had changed. She would not tell anyone what she saw beneath the shed. She only warned them that the spirit had not been destroyed. Madison looked toward the dark hallway leading out of the hall. It had only been trapped again. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Lenny snorted. Do you really expect us to believe that? The tension broke. A few campers laughed nervously. Lenny sat with his back against one of the old wooden chairs. He was 14, loud, and always looking for an opportunity to embarrass someone. He had spent most of the week insulting younger campers and pretending he was not afraid of anything. He pointed toward Madison. Dark magic? Talking to dead people? Evil shadows and magical grandmothers? Give it a rest, Maddie. You've been reading too many comic books. Several people laughed more loudly. Madison did not smile. She stared at Lenny with a strange expression. It was not anger. It looked more like pity. The truth does not care whether you believe it, Lenny, she said softly. The way she said his name made the laughter stop. Lenny shifted uncomfortably. How do you know my name? Madison did not answer. She stood. For a moment, the lantern light shone through the edge of her hoodie. I thought I could see the wall behind her, as if her body were not completely solid. Then, she stepped away from the circle and walked toward the hallway. Where are you going? Grace asked. Madison continued into the shadows. The hallway door slowly closed behind her. Lenny forced another laugh. She's a freak. No one answered him. I realized I did not know which cabin Madison slept in. I had never seen her carrying a bag or walking with a cabin group. I could not even remember hearing any counselor call her name. Before I could mention it, Lenny stood and stretched. This is stupid, he said. I'm going back to the cabin. As he stepped away from the circle, his boot struck a loose floorboard near the fireplace. A piece of wood lifted slightly. Something beneath it caught the lantern light. Lenny stopped. What's that? Leo moved closer and pressed his fingers beneath the edge of the board. Together, he and Lenny pulled it free. A narrow space had been hidden beneath the floor. Inside was an old wooden box. The box was covered in dust and dark stains. A rusted metal lock hung from the front, but it had already been broken. Don't open it, Grace said. Lenny rolled his eyes. You believe that story? No, I just don't think we should touch things hidden under the floor. That's why you're boring. He pulled the box out. The wood scraped loudly across the floor. A smell of damp paper and old smoke escaped when Lenny opened the lid. Inside were several yellowed newspapers, folded camp notices, and a single photograph. Leo picked up the newspapers. The first page was dated July 20th, 2004. A faded headline read, "Tragedy at Local Summer Camp." We gathered around him. The article described the deaths of 2 boys at Camp Silver Lake. Their bodies had been found near an old tool shed after they disappeared from their cabin during the night. The official explanation was exposure. That doesn't make sense, Leo said. It was July. Another article said the bodies had suffered unusual dehydration, though investigators could not explain the cause. A third camper had also gone missing. Her body had never been found. My stomach tightened. What was her name? I asked. Leo scanned the article. His face slowly lost its color. Madison Hale. No one moved. Lenny reached into the box and pulled out the photograph. It was an old Polaroid, scratched and faded around the edges. The picture showed 3 campers standing in front of the mess hall. 2 boys stood on either side of a small girl. The boys were smiling at the camera. One had his arm around the other's shoulders. The girl stood slightly apart from them. She wore a faded gray camp hoodie. Her dark hair was tangled around her pale face. She was smiling, but her eyes were large and sad. They were the same eyes that had watched us from across the lantern all night. Wait, I whispered. I took the photograph from Lenny and pointed toward the writing along the bottom. The ink had faded, but was still readable. July 19th, 2004. Below the date were 3 names: Elias, Sam, and Madison. Leo stumbled backward. "That's impossible." His voice cracked. "That picture was taken 22 years ago." Grace stared toward the hallway where Madison had disappeared. "The girl in the photograph is her." "No," Lenny said quickly. "It just looks like her." "It is her," I replied. "People can look alike." She had the same clothes. It's a camp hoodie. The same hair. The same eyes. Lenny shook his head. "This is a prank." One of the counselors set it up. "Then how did she know the story?" Grace asked. "She read the newspaper." "How did she know your name?" Lenny did not answer. The lantern suddenly went out. Several people screamed. The recreation hall dropped into darkness. Someone knocked over a chair. Shoes scraped against the floor as everyone stood at once. I turned on the flashlight on my phone. Leo and Grace did the same. The beams crossed across frightened faces. "Where's Madison?" I asked. No one knew. We rushed toward the hallway. The door she had passed through was still closed. When Leo pulled it open, cold air moved into the room. There was no one on the other side. The hallway led to a small storage room and the rear exit. The outside door was open. Rain blew across the floor. We ran into the night. The camp had become almost completely dark. The only light came from the lamps outside the cabins and the occasional flash of lightning above the trees. "Which cabin is hers?" Leo shouted. "I thought she was in cabin 6, Grace replied. "She's not," someone else said. "Cabin 6 is all younger campers. Maybe cabin 8. We raced across the wet recreation field. Mud splashed over our shoes, and rain stung our faces. The trees around the camp moved violently in the storm. Cabin 8 stood near the woods. Its door was unlocked. We rushed inside. Rows of wooden bunk beds filled the room. Bags, clothes, and sleeping campers occupied most of them. One bed near the back was empty. The blanket had been pulled tightly across the mattress. The pillow sat perfectly in the center. "This must be hers," Lenny said. I moved closer. A thick layer of dust covered the blanket. There were no handprints, no marks, and no signs that anyone had touched it. I ran one finger across the mattress. A clean line appeared through the dust. No one had slept there in years. Grace covered her mouth. She wasn't staying here. A girl in one of the other beds sat up. "What are you doing? Who sleeps here?" I asked, pointing at the dusty bunk. The girl stared at me. "No one." "Have you seen a girl named Madison?" She shook her head. "There's no Madison in this cabin." Lenny backed toward the door. "This is a joke." His voice had lost all its confidence. "Someone is messing with us." "Then we need to speak to Judy," I said. Judy was the head counselor. Her cabin stood near the camp office, on the opposite side of the grounds. We ran through the rain again. The storm seemed to grow stronger as we crossed the camp. The wind pushed against us, and lightning lit the surface of Silver Lake in the distance. For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing on the old dock, a small figure in a gray hoodie. Then, the darkness returned. We reached Judy's cabin and began pounding on the door. "Judy, open the door. It's an emergency." A light came on inside. A few seconds later, Judy opened the door wearing a robe over her pajamas. Her short hair was messy, and her face was tight with irritation. "What is going on? Where's Madison?" I asked. Judy frowned. "Who?" "Madison," I repeated. "The girl who was in the recreation hall with us." "There shouldn't be anyone in the recreation hall." You were all told to return to your cabins at 11. She was telling us a story, Leo said. It was about 3 campers and a ghost in the old shed. Judy's expression changed. The irritation disappeared. Where did you hear that story? From Madison, Grace said. She was sitting with us. Judy looked past us into the storm. Her face slowly became pale. There is no Madison registered for this camp session. Yes, there is, Lenny insisted. She wears an old camp hoodie. She has dark hair. She's small. Judy stared at him. I know what she looked like. The words made us fall silent. I held up the Polaroid. We found this under the recreation hall floor. Judy did not take it. She did not need to look closely. Her eyes remained fixed on the girl in the photograph. You found the old records, she whispered. What happened here? I asked. Judy leaned against the doorframe. For several seconds, she seemed unsure whether to answer. Then, thunder rolled across the lake. There was a camper named Madison Hale, she said. She came here 22 years ago. The story she told us was true? Grace asked. Some of it. Judy stepped aside and allowed us into the cabin. We crowded into the small room while rain struck the roof. Judy closed the door. There were 3 children, she continued. Elias Carter, Sam Warren, and Madison Hale. They left their cabin one night and went to the old tool shed. Why? Leo asked. Because of a story campers had been telling for years. They believed something lived inside it. The shadow in the shed, I said. Judy nodded. The next morning, counselors found Elias and Sam near the shed. Their bodies were badly dried out, although they had been missing for only a few hours. What happened to Madison? Lenny asked. Judy looked toward the window. No one knows for certain. You said she was a hero, I reminded her. That's what the older counselors believed. There was a circle of salt around the shed, along with symbols carved into the ground. The earth beneath the building had collapsed. Whatever those children discovered had been forced back underground. And Madison? Grace asked again. Her blood was found around the circle. Judy paused. There was far too much of it for her to have survived. The room became quiet, but they never found her body, I said. No. Judy walked to a small shelf and removed an old key. The camp closed for 5 years after the deaths. When it reopened, people began seeing a girl in a gray hoodie. She usually appeared before something dangerous happened. What kind of danger? Leo asked. Fires, accidents, children wandering into the woods. Once, a group of campers tried to break into the shed. A girl matching Madison's description warned a counselor in time to stop them. Judy looked at the Polaroid in my hand. People say Madison gave her life to seal the spirit away. They believe part of her remained here to make sure it never escaped. A cold breeze moved through the cabin, though every window was closed. It carried the faint smell of salt, wet earth, and old paper. She told us the shadow was only trapped, I said. Judy's eyes widened. What exactly did she say? She said it had not been destroyed, only trapped again. Lightning flashed. A deep wooden crack echoed from somewhere outside. Judy moved quickly toward the window. We followed her gaze. Across the camp, beyond the mess hall, the trees were moving. Not with the wind. They were bending away from the old tool shed. A dark shape rose between them. It was tall and thin, but it did not have a clear body. It looked like a section of the night had separated from the rest of the darkness. The camp lights flickered. Then, they went out. From far away came the sound of metal striking the ground. Once, twice, then a third time. "The chain," Judy whispered. "What?" I asked. "The chain on the shed door." A scream came from the direction of the cabins. Judy grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. We followed her despite her order to stay behind. Rain had turned the paths into streams. Campers and counselors were emerging from cabins, shouting questions. The dark shape moved between the trees. Every time lightning flashed, it appeared closer. Then Madison stepped out from behind the mess hall. She stood alone in the rain. Her faded hoodie moved gently around her body, though the wind was blowing in the opposite direction. She looked exactly as she had in the recreation hall. "Madison." I shouted. She turned toward us. Her large, sad eyes met mine. Then she looked at the old shed. Its door stood open. Darkness poured from it like smoke. Madison reached into the pocket of her hoodie and removed a small cloth bag. She opened it and poured salt into her palm. "Get everyone away from the woods," she said. Her voice was no longer soft or empty. It was strong. Judy began shouting at the counselors, ordering them to move all campers toward the dining hall. I remained where I was. Madison walked toward the shed. The shadow moved to meet her. As it crossed the clearing, voices whispered through the rain. Some sounded like children. Others sounded old and angry. One of them sounded like Lenny. "Madison," it called. Lenny gasped beside me. The shadow had copied his voice perfectly. Madison stopped and looked back at us. "The truth does not care if you believe it," she said. Then she poured the salt into a circle around herself. The shadow reached the edge. It could not cross. The trees began leaking dark red sap. The lake pulled away from the shore. Madison raised both hands and spoke in a language none of us understood. The ground beneath the shed shook. Hands pushed through the mud. Dozens of pale, rotting hands grabbed the shadow. It screamed as they began pulling it downward. For a moment, its shape changed. 2 dead boys appeared inside it. Elias and Sam. They reached toward Madison. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then the earth opened and swallowed them all. The shed collapsed into the ground. Mud and black water rose into the air before crashing over the clearing. When everything became still, Madison was gone. Only her faded gray hoodie remained. It lay inside a perfect circle of salt. By morning, the storm had passed. The counselors told the younger campers that lightning had destroyed the old tool shed. No one outside our group was told the full truth. The police searched the clearing but found no bodies. They also found no tunnel, grave, or space beneath the ground where the shed had stood. The old wooden box disappeared from the recreation hall. So did the Polaroid. Camp Silver Lake closed again at the end of that summer. Years have passed since that night. But I still remember Madison's face whenever I smelled damp pine or wood smoke. Most people believe she was only a camp legend. They say frightened teenagers invented the story after a storm damaged an abandoned shed. I know better. Madison was not simply part of the legend. She was the reason the camp had survived for so long. She had remained at Silver Lake for 22 years, watching the cabins, walking the dark paths, and waiting for the thing beneath the shed to wake again. She had joined our circle that night because she needed someone to remember her. Or perhaps she needed witnesses. Sometimes I wonder whether she finally destroyed the shadow or only forced it back into the earth for a little longer. Last week, I received an envelope without a return address. Inside was the old Polaroid. Elias and Sam were still standing in front of the mess hall, but Madison was no longer between them. There was a new person in the photograph. It was me. I stood in the center wearing the same faded gray camp hoodie. On the bottom of the picture, beneath the date and the original names, someone had added another sentence in fresh black ink. The camp still needs someone to watch it. Story 3. When I was a child, I grew up in the East Riding of Yorkshire. For any Americans reading this, Yorkshire is pronounced more like Yorkshire, not Yorkshire. I lived in a fairly ordinary port town that most people only saw for a few minutes while passing it on the motorway. There was nothing especially terrible about the place, but there was not much excitement either. It was the kind of town where everyone complained there was nothing to do, yet hardly anyone ever left. By the time I entered my early teenage years, I had become used to the quiet streets, the gray skies, and the same familiar faces appearing everywhere I went. I had recently finished my first year of high school, and my best friend at the time was a boy named Kyle. Kyle and I had known each other for years. We attended the same primary school, lived only a short distance apart, and spent most weekends together. We played football, rode our bikes around town, and wasted hours playing video games whenever the weather became too miserable to go outside. When we started high school, we were lucky enough to be placed in many of the same classes. That meant our friendship continued without much effort. We sat beside each other whenever teachers allowed it, shared lunch breaks, and usually ended up in trouble for talking too much. There was another boy in our class named Kieran. We already knew who Kieran was because he had attended the same primary school as us. However, our school divided each year group into 2 classes, and Kieran had always been placed in the opposite one. We saw him in the playground and during school events, but we had never spent enough time together to become proper friends. That changed during our first year of high school. Kieran was difficult to miss. While Kyle and I were both quite short for our age, Kieran was tall and thin, with long arms and legs that made him look even taller than he actually was. For most of primary school, he also had thick, curly hair that grew in every direction. The other children called him Curly Fries because of it. Before high school began, Kieran shaved all the curls away. I always suspected he had done it because he did not want that nickname following him into his teenage years. Unfortunately for him, nicknames had a way of surviving much longer than the reason they had started. Because we already knew one another and now shared the same classes, it did not take long for the 3 of us to become close. Before the end of the school year, Kyle, Kieran, and I went almost everywhere together. I even convinced Kieran to join the football team my father managed. Kyle and I were already players, so adding Kieran meant we spent even more time as a group. We trained together during the week, played matches on Sundays, and complained about my father whenever he made us run extra laps. After nearly a full year of friendship, Kieran invited Kyle and me on a day trip for his 13th birthday. His mother and stepfather were taking him to a theme park in North Yorkshire called Lakewater Valley, and they had agreed that he could bring 2 friends. Neither Kyle nor I needed much convincing. Before that trip, I had visited only one other theme park in my life. That earlier visit had included my first experience on a roller coaster, and it had not gone particularly well. I remember waiting almost 2 hours in a long queue while a group of girls near the front screamed every time the coaster passed. By the time I finally reached the platform, I was impatient, overheated, and determined to prove that I was not frightened. Then, the ride began. The only thing I clearly remember from that first roller coaster is shouting the same word over and over as we dropped down the first slope. Shit. 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 I did not discover until almost a year later that the coaster I had chosen was apparently one of the steepest in the world at the time. Not simply the steepest in Britain, but one of the steepest anywhere. It was called Mumbo Jumbo at Flamingo Land. Had I known what it was before climbing aboard, I probably would have chosen a much gentler ride for my first experience. Because of that, I approached Lakewater Valley with a strange mixture of excitement and fear. We arrived early in the morning after a long drive through the countryside. Kieran's mother had packed drinks and sandwiches, while his stepfather, Steve, spent most of the journey telling us which rides we needed to try first. Steve was a former rugby player and one of the largest men I had ever met. He had broad shoulders, powerful arms, and the kind of build that made every car seat look too small. Despite his size, he was friendly and always willing to laugh at himself. The entrance to Lakewater Valley was colorful and crowded. Families pushed children in prams, teenagers hurried towards the largest rides, and music played from speakers hidden near the paths. The first part of the park included a small animal and bird sanctuary. There were enclosures containing goats, deer, parrots, and birds of prey. Nearby were the gentler attractions designed for younger children. Kyle seemed perfectly happy in that area. I wanted something more exciting. It did not take long before we reached the first major ride of the day. It was called the Falcon Claw. The Falcon Claw was a huge pendulum ride with a circular row of seats attached to the bottom. Once everyone was secured, the machine swung higher and higher while the seats rotated. Riders were lifted far above the park before dropping backwards and twisting in the opposite direction. I watched it for several minutes. People screamed whenever it reached the highest point, and their legs hung freely beneath them. "I'm going on that," I said. Kyle immediately shook his head. "There's no chance." Kieran did not look well. He had been quiet since breakfast and said his stomach felt strange. "I'll go later," he told me. I knew that meant he had no intention of going at all. I did not want to ride alone, so Steve agreed to join me. Because he was so large, I felt safer sitting beside him. I imagined that if anything went wrong, Steve could somehow hold the entire ride together using his arms. That confidence disappeared as soon as the machine started moving. The Falcon Claw swung forward, then backwards, rising higher each time. The seats rotated as we climbed, and the ground appeared to spin beneath us. I closed my eyes. I kept them closed for almost the entire ride. Each drop made my stomach rise into my chest. Wind struck my face, and people screamed around me. I tried telling myself that the ride had been tested and that thousands of people used it safely every year, but none of those thoughts helped. When the machine finally stopped, I stepped onto the platform with shaking legs. Steve laughed and asked whether I had enjoyed it. I told him it had been brilliant, although I could barely walk in a straight line because of the dizziness. After I recovered from the vertigo, we continued farther into the park. The next attraction was a water ride. From a distance, I expected something large and dangerous. When we reached it, I discovered it was little more than a long water slide that people traveled down inside inflatable boats. Unlike the Falcon Claw, Kyle and Kieran agreed to ride it. The three of us joined the queue and slowly moved towards the front. While we waited, I heard laughter directly behind me. I turned around. Two girls, both probably around 11 years old, stood in the queue behind us. They were looking at me and whispering. One of them finally asked, "Were you on the Falcon Claw earlier?" "Yes," I replied. They immediately started laughing again. "You had your eyes closed the whole time," the other girl said. Apparently, they had been sitting close enough to see me. They found it hilarious that someone older than them had looked so terrified. Kyle and Kieran heard the conversation and joined in. For the rest of the day, neither of them allowed me to forget it. Every time we passed the Falcon Claw, one of them would close his eyes, grab the nearest object, and pretend to scream. After several more hours of rides, food, and walking around the park, we finally reached its most famous attraction, the Maximum. The Maximum had been built in the early 1990s and had once held the record for being the longest roller coaster in the world. The track stretched for more than 2,000 meters through the park and nearby woodland. What made it especially famous was the forest section. After climbing 2 large hills and dropping down steep slopes, the coaster entered a thick area of trees. The track twisted between narrow gaps, passed beneath old stone structures, and disappeared from view for long periods. Kieran had ridden the Maximum before. He spoke about it constantly during the weeks leading up to the trip. According to him, it was the fastest, longest, and most exciting ride in the park. I wanted to try it too. Kyle did not. He stood at the entrance, looked towards the first hill, and announced that he would wait with Kieran's parents. We called him a coward, but nothing changed his mind. That left Kieran and me to ride alone. The queue was long, though it moved more quickly than I expected. As we approached the platform, I could hear the metal wheels of the coaster striking the track and the screams of passengers returning from the forest. The cars arrived, the previous riders climbed out, and workers quickly checked the seats. Kieran and I managed to sit near the front. We pulled the restraints over our shoulders while the other cars filled behind us. A worker walked along the platform, pressing each harness and checking that it had locked correctly. Then the coaster began to move. The train left the station and rolled towards the first lift hill. A metal chain caught beneath the cars and slowly pulled us upwards. The climb seemed to last forever. Each mechanical click made the ground appear farther away. From near the front, Kieran and I had a clear view across the park. We could see the Falcon Claw swinging in the distance, the water rides, food stands, and crowds moving along the paths. For a brief moment, everything felt calm. Then we reached the summit. The front of the coaster moved over the edge. I could no longer see the track beneath us. The train paused for less than a second before falling down the slope. Every passenger screamed. My stomach seemed to remain at the top while the rest of my body dropped. I felt almost weightless, but it was not pleasant. There was a painful, twisting sensation in my chest and stomach, as though something inside me had been pulled in the wrong direction. Once the cars reached the bottom, we entered several sharp turns. The coaster moved at a speed that felt unnatural. Each bend pushed us hard against the sides of our seats. The train climbed small hills, dropped again, and shook so violently that my shoulders struck the restraints. The entire section probably lasted only seconds. But when you are screaming and convinced the machine might leave the track, time moves differently. Eventually, the cars began to slow. I felt relieved until I saw the second lift hill ahead. The chain pulled us upwards once again. This hill was higher than the first. The drop on the other side was also steeper and led directly into the forest. As the train climbed, fear returned. Fortunately, something in the car behind us distracted us. 4 Jamaican tourists were sitting there. They had been laughing loudly before the ride began, but they became much quieter as we approached the top. One of them looked over the side and shouted, "Oh no, man." Kieran and I burst out laughing. The terrified voices behind us reminded us of the film Cool Runnings, and for several seconds. The fear of the second drop became easier to handle. Then we reached the top. The track vanished over the edge. The coaster dropped. We fell faster than before, heading directly towards the trees. The forest rushed towards us. Branches seemed close enough to touch. The track twisted through narrow spaces between tree trunks, and the cars moved at a speed I had never experienced anywhere else. Every turn made me imagine the wheels leaving the rails. I pictured the entire train flying sideways and striking one of the trees. At that speed, there would have been nothing left of us except twisted metal and pieces of bodies scattered through the forest. The coaster made one painful turn, followed by another. My body was thrown from side to side. Kieran shouted beside me, though I could barely hear him over the wind and grinding metal. Ahead, the track passed beneath a stone bridge. The opening beneath it was completely dark. Before I could prepare myself, the coaster entered. The darkness covered us like a blanket. I could no longer see the track, the trees, or even Kieran sitting beside me. The sound of the wheels became louder beneath the stone. Every scream echoed through the tunnel. We were moving too quickly to understand where the track turned. Then, something struck the front of the train. The impact produced a deep, heavy thud. The coaster shook. A wet, warm substance exploded across my face. For a moment, I could not understand what had happened. The ride continued moving, and the darkness made it impossible to see. My first thought was that the wheels had passed through a puddle. Perhaps dirty water had been thrown into the air and sprayed across us. The substance covered my cheeks, forehead, lips, and shirt. It felt thicker than water, but my mind refused to consider any other explanation. A few seconds later, the train left the tunnel. Daylight returned. We were still moving quickly through the forest when I turned towards Kieran. The sight of him made my stomach tighten. His face and shirt were covered with a dark red substance. It ran from his hair, down his cheeks, and across his neck. His eyes were partly closed because some of it had entered them. He spat repeatedly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "What is this?" he shouted. I looked down at my own shirt. It was covered, too. I touched my face, then held my fingers in front of me. They were red, not brown like muddy water. Red, blood, the realization seemed to silence the world for a moment. Then the sounds returned all at once. The steel wheels grinding against the track, people shouting, children crying, passengers screaming. These were no longer the playful screams of people enjoying a frightening ride. They were screams of horror. I looked towards the cars in front of us. Every passenger was covered in the same red liquid. Pieces of dark flesh clung to some of the seats and safety restraints. Something had been on the track. The coaster had struck it at full speed. Kieran began wiping his eyes with his sleeve. I tried to clean my face, but my hands only spread the blood farther across my skin. The train continued through the final section of the forest before slowing near the station. Those last few minutes felt far longer than the rest of the ride. Everyone wanted to escape, but the restraints remained locked until the cars reached the platform. When the coaster finally stopped, the safety bars released. Passengers climbed out immediately. Some slipped while trying to leave too quickly. Others stood frozen beside the cars, staring at their blood-covered clothes. A woman began crying uncontrollably. One man shouted at the park workers and demanded to know what the train had struck. Kieran and I stumbled onto the platform. As the passengers moved away, we saw Kyle standing with Kieran's mother and Steve. All three stared at us in complete shock. Kieran's mother rushed forward. "What happened to you?" "We hit something," Kieran said. "Under the bridge," I added. "We couldn't see it." Steve looked at the blood covering us. "What did you hit?" "We don't know. Because the bridge had hidden the track in darkness, none of us had seen what was there. Park employees closed the ride immediately. They directed passengers away from the platform, while supervisors contacted security and maintenance workers. Kieran and I were taken to the toilets to wash. The blood had already begun drying in our hair and on our clothes. It took several minutes to clean it from our faces. Kieran repeatedly rinsed his mouth because some of the liquid had entered it during the collision. While we cleaned ourselves, Kieran's mother and many of the other adults complained to park officials. Workers eventually searched the track beneath the stone bridge. After some time, a manager gave an explanation. A wild deer had supposedly wandered onto the track. According to the park, the roller coaster struck the animal at high speed. The impact killed and decapitated it, spraying blood and tissue across the passengers. The explanation was horrifying, but it made sense. The maximum traveled through a wooded area where wild animals lived. A damaged fence or open gate might have allowed a deer to reach the track. Kieran's parents decided we were leaving immediately. None of us argued. During the drive back to East Yorkshire, Kyle remained unusually quiet. Earlier, he had been embarrassed about refusing to ride. Now he seemed grateful that he had stayed behind. Kieran and I sat in the back, wearing replacement shirts bought from the park gift shop. Our original clothes had been sealed inside plastic bags. We agreed that we would never return to Lakewater Valley. I wish the story had ended there. Unfortunately, it did not. Because wild deer can carry infections and diseases, our parents arranged medical tests for both of us. The blood had not merely touched our clothes, it had entered our eyes, noses, and mouths. I was tested for illnesses including Lyme disease and leptospirosis, which is also known as Weil's disease. Waiting for the results was terrifying. Every headache made me believe I was sick. Every time my stomach hurt, I imagined something dangerous spreading through my body. My results eventually came back negative. I had not contracted anything. Kieran was not so fortunate. Several days after the trip, he became unwell. It started with a fever and sore throat. Then came severe tiredness, swollen glands, and muscle pain. His parents took him back to the doctor, where more tests were performed. The results showed that he had contracted an infection. At first, everyone assumed it came from the deer's blood. Then the doctors noticed something strange. The disease Kieran had was not known to spread from deer to humans. In fact, the infection could only be transferred through contact with blood from a member of the same species, human blood. Kieran's parents demanded that the park explain what had happened. Lakewater Valley continued to claim that the coaster had struck a wild animal. The park insisted the remains found beneath the bridge belonged to a deer. They refused to release photographs or allow Kieran's family to examine the official report. The police became involved, but very little information was shared with us. The maximum remained closed for several weeks. When it reopened, The park announced that new fencing and safety measures had been installed around the forest section. The stone bridge was cleaned, and the incident slowly disappeared from the news. Most people accepted the explanation. A deer had wandered onto the track. It was a tragic accident. But the medical results told a different story. Whatever exploded across the passengers beneath that bridge had contained human blood. I have spent years wondering who had been on the track that day. I wonder whether the person was alive when the train struck them. I wonder how they reached the bridge, why no one saw them, and why the park was so determined to call them an animal. Most of all, I wonder what happened to the rest of the body. Kieran eventually recovered, though he never spoke much about the experience afterward. Our friendship changed as we grew older, and we eventually lost contact. I still remember the moment beneath that bridge, the heavy impact, the warm liquid striking my face, the taste of metal on my lips. For a few seconds, everyone on that roller coaster believed we had been sprayed with dirty water. Then, daylight returned, and we saw what covered us. The park said it was the blood of a wild deer. The doctors proved that it was not. The blood that infected Kieran that day had come from another human being. Story 4. I have been living out of my car for a little over 5 years now. It was not something I planned. Nobody grows up dreaming about sleeping in the back seat of an old Lada, washing in petrol station bathrooms, and learning which parking areas are safe enough to stay in overnight. Life simply pushed me in that direction, and once I was there, I had no easy way back. I lost my apartment after falling behind on the rent more than once. My landlord was an absolute bastard. He never called me, never knocked on my door to warn me, never gave me a final chance to explain. I came home from work one evening with my paycheck in my pocket, ready to hand most of it over to him, like I usually did, and found a pink eviction notice taped to the front door. The locks had already been changed. Everything I owned was still inside. My clothes, tools, books, photographs, and the few things my father had left me were all trapped behind that door. The landlord clearly planned to keep whatever was worth selling and throw the rest away. So I broke in. I am not proud of it, but I do not regret it either. I climbed through the small bathroom window after forcing it open with a tire iron. I managed to take 2 bags of clothes, my work tools, a blanket, a box of old family photographs, and a few other things before a neighbor started shouting that she was calling the police. I had to leave a lot behind, more than I like to think about. But that is enough about the eviction. My name is Ilya. For the past 5 years, it has mostly been me and my Lada. She is old, loud, ugly, and covered in rust. The heater works when it feels like it, and the air conditioning sounds like a dying animal. But she keeps me alive. She gives me somewhere to sleep when the temperature drops below freezing, somewhere to hide from rain, and somewhere to run when a place starts feeling wrong. I call her my dear Lada, even when I am swearing at her. Here in rural Russia, especially around the edges of cities and old industrial towns, you see a lot of strange things. Some of it is easy to explain. Drunk men stumbling through fields at 4 in the morning, abandoned factories making strange sounds in the wind, wild dogs moving between empty apartment blocks, military vehicles passing through places where no military base is supposed to exist. But some things are different. Some things stay in your mind because no explanation fits. The first strange thing I ever saw happened only a few weeks after I was evicted. I was still angry then, Angry at my landlord, angry at the garage that had fired me, angry at the government, angry at the world, and mostly angry at myself. I had driven far north, though I no longer remember exactly why. Maybe I was looking for temporary work. Maybe I had followed rumors about a construction site that needed mechanics. Maybe I had simply kept driving until the roads became narrow and the towns became small. At that time, I drank heavily. Days disappeared inside bottles. It is possible that the only reason I ended up in that village was because I had done something stupid on the road and somebody had recorded it on a dashboard camera. For all I know, there is still a video online of my Lada sliding through an intersection while I shouted insults through the window. I do not remember. The village itself looked respectable enough. Snow covered the roads and gathered on the roofs of the wooden houses. Long spikes of ice hung from the gutters. Icicles, that is the word. At the time, I could not remember it in English and kept thinking of them as ice spikes. Old men in thick coats walked slowly along the road. Babushkas carried shopping bags and pulled scarves tightly around their heads. Smoke rose from chimneys, turning the sky above the village gray. Most of the houses looked warm. Yellow light glowed behind curtains. Wood smoke filled the air. Every now and then, I heard the sound of a radio playing somewhere inside. There I was, parked near the edge of the village, drinking Stolichnaya vodka in the middle of the day and smoking one cigarette after another. I had left the windows partly closed because of the cold, and before long the inside of the car was filled with smoke. It rolled around me in thick layers until my windows looked as cloudy as the chimneys on the houses. A few people glanced at me as they passed. Nobody said anything. Perhaps they saw the blankets and boxes in the back seat and understood. Perhaps they simply knew better than to speak to a drunk man sitting alone in an old car. Before the eviction, I had worked at a small repair garage. I had been there for several years. The pay was terrible, but I understood engines, and I was good with my hands. The owner was not a bad man, just tired. The garage barely made enough money to survive. Then a larger company bought it. They kept the owner because they needed someone who understood the local customers. But the rest of us were dismissed. Just like that. No protection, no union, no committee. Nobody came to fight for us. My father used to talk about the old trade unions during the Soviet era. He said workers had people to stand beside them when managers tried to destroy their lives. Maybe he remembered those days as better than they were. People do that when they get old. I was not alive for most of that time, so I cannot say whether the system truly worked. But when the garage was sold, and all of us lost our jobs, I wished someone had been there to speak for us. Anyone. Instead, I ended up drinking alone in a freezing village with everything I owned packed into a rusty car. At some point, the vodka pulled me into sleep. It was not a peaceful sleep. There were no dreams, only darkness. When I woke, the world had changed. The village was silent. It was fully dark outside, and the streets were empty. Only a few street lamps and porch lights remained on. They gave off a warm orange glow that made the snow around them look almost golden. For a few seconds, the scene seemed peaceful. The inside of the Lada smelled of smoke, ash, old fabric, sweat, and alcohol. The windows were fogged. An empty cigarette packet lay on the floor beside my boots. Then the pain arrived. My head felt as though someone was pounding a fist against the inside of my skull. Each beat of my heart sent another wave of pain through me. I could hear everything too clearly. the ticking of my wristwatch, my own breathing, the blood moving through my ears, a faint buzzing near the window, and underneath it, the sound of crickets. That should have bothered me immediately. Crickets do not sing in the middle of a northern winter, but I was drunk, sick, and barely awake. Then my stomach turned. The pain in my head was replaced by the feeling that my whole body was flipping upside down. My mouth filled with saliva, and I knew I was about to vomit. I grabbed the door handle with one gloved hand and pushed myself outside. The cold hit me like a slap. I stumbled 2 steps and fell to my knees in the snow. My gloves were old and full of holes around the fingers. The ice pressed through the wet fabric immediately. I bent forward and started heaving. Nothing came out. My stomach twisted, but it was empty. My throat burned as I gagged again and again. The buzzing continued. So did the cricket sound. Chirp, chirp, chirp. It seemed to come from the dead grass near the edge of the road. The half-empty vodka bottle rolled from the car and passed beside me. It turned slowly across the ice before stopping near a low bank of snow beneath one of the street lamps. At that moment, the bottle seemed like the only cure in the world. I crawled toward it on my hands and knees. The ice scraped my palms through the holes in my gloves. My knees slipped beneath me, and I nearly fell onto my face. Eventually, I managed to rise into a crouch and reach the bottle. The glass was cold even through the leather. I smiled when I picked it up. It felt like a gift, a small kindness from the night. I unscrewed the cap and lifted the bottle to my mouth. The vodka burned as it passed down my throat, but for a moment, the pain became easier to bear. Then I heard the chirping again. Louder, it seemed to be directly beside me. I kept the bottle near my lips and looked toward the grass. The sound came from a small patch where the snow had not completely covered the ground. I wiped my mouth with my coat sleeve and stared down. Something brown moved between the frozen stems. I became irritated. I was angry at the insects for interrupting the first moment of relief I had felt since waking. Without thinking about why there were insects alive in that cold, I kicked hard at the patch of grass. My boot struck the snow. A large clump broke loose and flew through the air. It passed beyond the edge of the street lamp's light and landed several meters away with a soft crash. The chirping stopped. I stood there with the vodka bottle in my hand, feeling satisfied. Then the snow where the clump had landed began to move. At first, I thought it was an animal. A cat, perhaps, then maybe a dog. The mound rose higher. For one confused second, I wondered whether a bear had been sleeping beneath the snow. That made no sense. The shape was too narrow. Snow fell away from it in loose sheets. Something unfolded. It had hair, though hair was not the right word. Long, thin spikes covered parts of its body. They looked like dark needles or stiff wire. There were too many in some places, and almost none in others. The creature kept rising and rising. Even from a distance, I could see that it was far taller than a person. Its limbs were thin and jointed. Each movement was stiff, like frozen metal hinges being forced open. Powdery snow slid from its body and collected around its feet. For a moment, I believed it was made from steel. Its surface reflected the weak orange light in a dull, dirty way. The color may have been dark green or brown. I cannot be certain. My vision was blurred from the alcohol, but I know what I saw was not flesh. At least not flesh like ours. Then I saw its eyes. They were enormous, round, almost egg-shaped, and set on either side of its head. The surface of each eye reflected the moonlight in sickly colors. Purple, yellow, green, a strange pattern covered them. A web of tiny lines, the eyes of an insect. I stood completely still. The thing had to be nearly 3 meters tall. Its body was narrow through the chest, but a large rounded shape hung beneath it, positioned between its legs, while also seeming attached to the lower torso. I do not know how else to describe it. It looked like the swollen body of a giant insect. Then it made a sound. The cricket-like chirping began again, but now it was deeper and louder. A long clicking whine. Its whole body shook. The bulb beneath its torso vibrated so quickly that it blurred. The sound changed into a rattle. Then came the rumble. I had worked around engines most of my life. I knew the roar of old car engines, heavy trucks, tractors, and generators. I had heard helicopters pass low overhead and felt their blades beating the air. This creature made them all sound weak. The rumble came from inside its body. The air around it began to shake. Snow lifted from the ground in circles. The dead grass bent flat. Within a second, the layer of powder around the creature had been blown away, revealing dark earth beneath. That was when I understood. It was not simply standing. It was preparing to fly. Its body rose several centimeters from the ground. The legs hung beneath it. The vibration became so strong that I felt it in my teeth. Then it was on top of me. I never saw it cross the distance. One moment, it stood beyond the street lamp. The next, its huge body filled the orange light above me. Its legs were long and hooked. The wings, if they were wings, moved too quickly to see. The air struck my face with enough force to make me stagger. Its head lowered. 2 large pincers opened near its mouth. I reacted without thinking. My hand threw the vodka bottle. It struck the creature's body and shattered. Glass exploded across its hard surface. For a fraction of a second, everything stopped. Then the creature screamed. It was not an animal roar. The sound that came from its pincers was a sharp, hissing crackle, like electricity passing through broken speakers. The noise cut through my head. I dropped to one knee and covered my ears. I do not know whether the glass hurt it. Maybe the alcohol reached something sensitive. Maybe the sudden impact only surprised it. I did not stay to find out. I ran. My legs slipped on the ice. I fell against the side of the car, grabbed the open door, and pulled myself inside. My hands clawed at the seat and gear stick as I dragged my body behind the wheel. I reached back for the door and slammed it shut. The movement shook the whole car. I fell against the passenger side window, then twisted around to look through the glass. My heart hammered so violently that pain spread across my chest. The street lamp still glowed. Snow moved through its orange light, but the creature was gone. I stared at the empty space where it had been. My breathing would not slow. I turned and looked through the rear window. Nothing. I checked the back seat. My box of clothes sat where I had left it. A wooden crate held several more bottles of vodka. Nothing else was inside. I crawled back into the driver's seat. One of the windows had been left open slightly during the day to let cigarette smoke escape. I grabbed the handle and rolled it closed as quickly as I could. The old mechanism squeaked. I locked both doors. Then I stared through the windshield. The sky was black. I could not see a single star. Only the moon showed through thin clouds. For several seconds, I saw nothing unusual. Then, something crossed the moonlight. A large shape moved behind the clouds above the field. It passed too quickly for me to understand its form, but the moon disappeared behind it for a moment. I turned the key. My dear Lotta started immediately. I have never loved that sound more. The engine roared, rough and uneven, but alive. I had modified it myself over the years, replacing parts, adjusting the fuel system, and making changes that probably should not have worked. That night, the noise felt powerful. I pushed the car into gear and drove. I did not look back at the village. The tires slipped several times on the icy road, but I kept moving. I passed the dark houses, the orange lamps, and the silent fields. I drove until the village disappeared behind me. Even then, I did not stop. The engine's roar used to make me proud. After what I heard that night, it never sounded as strong again. Every motor now reminds me of that creature. No human machine has ever matched the sound it made. It sounded older than technology. Natural, but somehow more powerful than anything made from steel. I finally stopped on a larger road after the sky had begun turning gray. My hands were cramped around the steering wheel. The pain in my head had returned, but I no longer wanted alcohol. An old plastic bottle of water lay on the floor. I picked it up and drank. The water was almost frozen, but it felt better than anything I had tasted before. I swallowed until the bottle was empty, drinking like an engine receiving fresh fuel. I have not touched alcohol since that night. Not once. People sometimes ask how I managed to quit after drinking so heavily. I never tell them the truth. I say I became sick of waking up in strange places. I say I wanted to save money. I say living in a car is difficult enough without being drunk. All of those things are true. But the real reason is that I needed to know whether the creature was real. If I kept drinking, I could always dismiss it as a hallucination. I could blame the cold, the vodka, withdrawal, or exhaustion. I stayed sober because I wanted proof. For years, I drove across Russia and through other former Soviet states. I took temporary work wherever I could find it. Repairs, deliveries, farm equipment, construction machines. At night, I watched the roads. I watched fields, forests, mountains, abandoned military sites, and the empty spaces between cities. I listened for the clicking. Sometimes I heard strange sounds in the dark. Sometimes I saw shapes move where nothing should have been. For a long time, I never saw anything like that creature again. Then other things began happening. Enough that I stopped doubting myself. I know now that what I saw was not created by vodka. It was not a dream. It was not a confused memory from a freezing night. Something was buried beneath that snow. Something that looked like an insect, but was far too large to exist. Maybe it had been sleeping there. Maybe it was hunting. Maybe the chirping was not accidental. Perhaps it was calling me closer. I often think about how quickly it reached me. If I had not thrown the bottle, I do not believe I would have survived. I also think about the village. The people seemed normal during the day. Old men walked to work. Babushkas carried groceries. Smoke rose from chimneys. Did they know what lived beneath the snow? Had anyone else seen it? Maybe that was why the streets became completely empty at night. I cannot remember the name of the village. I have searched maps, but too many places look the same in winter. Perhaps part of me does not want to find it again. I still live in my Lada. She is older now. There is more rust around the doors. and the engine needs constant care, but she still starts. I sleep in the back with my tools and blankets. I keep water under the passenger seat and emergency fuel in the boot. I no longer carry crates of vodka. I carry cameras. Extra batteries. A notebook filled with dates, roads, weather conditions, and everything strange I see. I began this journey hoping to prove that the creature was only a hallucination. Instead, I proved the opposite. Across Russia and the former Soviet states, something else moves alongside us. Not ghosts. Not only ghosts, at least. There are things in the cities, things in forests, things above mountains, and things buried beneath winter fields. I have seen shapes standing beside highways at noon. I have heard voices calling from abandoned buildings in the middle of the night. I have watched lights move beneath frozen lakes. Somewhere beyond the reach of street lamps and apartment windows, there are creatures that do not belong in any book I have read. Maybe they have always been here. Maybe the empty land simply gives them room to hide. People believe the wilderness is quiet because nothing lives there. They are wrong. It is quiet because whatever lives there has learned not to be noticed. Sometimes, when I park alone at night, I hear crickets outside my car. Even in winter, whenever that happens, I lock the doors. I start the engine. And I drive. Because after 5 years on the road, there is one thing I know for certain. No matter where you are, no matter what time of day it is, something is always out there. Story 5. Things were never the same after one ordinary Tuesday in the fall. Before that day, I believed having a child was the thing that would finally make my life complete. I imagined motherhood as a missing piece, something I had always been meant to hold, but had not yet been given. I thought that once I became pregnant, every disappointment and every lonely year would suddenly make sense. Now, I sometimes wonder whether I was ever supposed to want it at all. My husband Marcus and I tried for years to have a baby. There is no easy way to admit that. People speak about pregnancy as though it is the most natural thing in the world. They ask newly married couples when they plan to have children, as if a child is something you simply decide to create. For us, it was never that simple. Every month began with hope and ended with quiet disappointment. At first, we tried to remain positive. We told each other that these things took time. We bought vitamins, changed our diets, and followed every piece of advice we were given. Then, the months became years. Doctors asked questions that made us uncomfortable. They ordered tests, took blood, and discussed our bodies in cold medical language. We learned words we had never wanted to know. Ovulation, hormone levels, motility, fertility windows. Each appointment seemed to remove something private from our marriage. There were arguments. Some were small, others were cruel. Neither of us wanted to blame the other directly, but blame still entered the room. It appeared in unfinished sentences and silent looks. It lived inside questions that sounded innocent, but were not. Had I remembered to take the medication? Had Marcus followed the doctor's advice? Was I too stressed? Was he drinking too much? Were we trying often enough? Were we trying too often? Sometimes one of us would speak carelessly, and the other would hear an accusation. A simple conversation would become a fight, and the fight would burn until both of us were exhausted. We kept pouring gasoline onto a fire that had already grown out of control. Still, we stayed together. No matter how difficult it became, Marcus and I always returned to the same truth. We wanted the same thing. We were trapped in the same boat, facing the same storm. We might fight over which direction to row, but neither of us wanted to abandon the other. The storm became our God. We begged it for mercy. We apologized for sins we could not name. We promised to become better people, if only we were given the chance to bring something good into the world. We wanted to bring light into our home, into our darkened world. Then, one morning, the storm finally answered us. I had taken so many pregnancy tests over the years that I had learned not to look at them with hope. Hope made the disappointment worse. That morning, I placed the test beside the sink and tried to avoid staring at it. I washed my hands. I folded a towel. I looked at myself in the mirror and told myself not to expect anything. When I finally looked down, there were 2 lines. The second line was faint. I leaned closer, certain that my eyes were creating something that was not there. I picked up the test and carried it toward the window. The line remained. I checked the instructions. Then I checked them again. 2 lines meant pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor for longer than I can remember. I held the test carefully, afraid that if I moved too quickly or looked away, the line would disappear. But it stayed. For a few seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Then, I cried. It was not the kind of crying I had become used to. This was not the quiet pain that followed another failed month. It was not disappointment settling deeper into my bones. This was different. The tears came without permission. They were sharp, overwhelming, and almost painful. Joy felt unfamiliar after so many years without it. My hands shook. I kept touching my face, almost as if I needed proof that I was awake. For the first time in years, I was not mourning something I had lost or something I believed I would never have. I had been given something real, a blessing. I did not yet understand how quickly a blessing could be taken away. Marcus was happier than I had seen him in years. He had become skilled at pretending everything was fine. Throughout our struggle, he wore careful smiles, so I would not see how deeply he was hurting. I always saw it anyway. His sadness lived behind his eyes. It was quiet and shared, something neither of us wanted to speak about because saying it aloud would make it heavier. When I showed him the test, that sadness disappeared. His smile was real. It was open and unguarded, the same smile he had worn when he asked me to prom all those years earlier. Back then, the world had not yet had time to break either of us. He laughed and cried at the same time. He picked me up, turned me around, then immediately became afraid that he had moved me too roughly. For the next 8 weeks, everything changed. Marcus read books about pregnancy. He searched online for the best foods, the safest exercises, and the earliest signs of trouble. He began speaking to my stomach, even though there was nothing to see yet. At night, we lay in bed and whispered about names. He wanted a boy. I wanted a girl. Neither of us truly cared. We discussed bedrooms, schools, and birthdays. We imagined Christmas mornings and family vacations. We spoke about the future as if it had finally decided to include us. I wish those 8 weeks could have lasted forever. The break-in happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays had never meant anything before. Now, every Tuesday feels like a door opening into something I cannot escape. Marcus was at work. I was home alone, folding laundry in the bedroom, when I heard the back door break. The sound was sudden and violent. For one confused second, I thought something had fallen in the kitchen. Then, I heard footsteps. I do not like remembering what happened next. I will not describe all of it. I will only say that a man entered our home, and I survived. Survival sounds like a victory when people speak about it from a distance. They say you are strong. They tell you to be grateful that you are alive. They do not tell you that survival can feel like being trapped inside the scene forever. The man was arrested within days. He was tried within months. The court sentenced him to enough years that everyone told us we should feel safe. People used the word justice. No sentence could fill what he left behind. Not in the house, not inside Marcus, not inside me, especially not after the miscarriage. The doctors never gave us one clear answer. They spoke about trauma, stress, physical shock, and complications. Their voices were gentle, as if soft words could change what had happened. Nothing changed it. The child we had waited years for was gone. I felt hollow. It was not simply sadness. It was as though something important had been removed from me so completely that even the empty space no longer understood what used to be there. The light in my life did not fade slowly. It stopped. One moment there had been warmth and a future. The next, there was only the memory of both. Marcus changed after that. He had always been a man of action. When there was a problem, he wanted something he could repair, replace, or control. There was nothing he could do about what had happened to me. There was nothing he could do about the baby. So he focused on the house. Within days, he installed security cameras outside. The first camera watched the front porch and street. The second covered the driveway. The third pointed toward the backyard and broken back door. I understood. The cameras made him feel useful. They gave him the illusion that he could stop the past from happening again. Then winter came, and he installed more. A camera appeared in the living room. Another watched the kitchen. One covered the upstairs hallway. Eventually, there was one in the bedroom. That camera bothered me. I told Marcus it felt invasive. He said he needed to know I was safe. After everything that had happened, I did not have the strength to argue. I told myself the cameras were part of his grief. We were both trying to survive in different ways. After the intruder was sentenced and the cameras were in place, we never tried again to have a child. It was not because I had completely given up. At first, I assumed we both needed time. Marcus simply stopped touching me. There was no dramatic announcement. He did not say that he blamed me or that he no longer loved me. He just became distant. There were no kisses, no hand resting on my shoulder as he walked past, no arms around me in bed, not even the simple comfort of a hug. I told myself he was being careful. Perhaps he believed I was too fragile. Perhaps he was afraid of hurting me. Months passed. We never discussed trying again. We did not speak about children, our marriage, or the future. We existed in the same house, but lived separate lives. We moved through the rooms like two small objects floating through an empty space that no longer understood how to hold warmth. I spent long afternoons sitting near the window. Marcus stayed late at work. When he came home, we ate in silence. We watched television without following the shows. At night, we slept with several inches between us, both pretending not to notice. Then, one evening, Marcus came home with a slight smile.